the God of the gaps. So, for instance, it's like, well, and I think it diminishes God in a way. Now,
talk show where we're kicking it and having fun on inspirational radio. We're the talk show, kicking it and having fun. So turn your radio up.
Let me explain, because it's like, we haven't understood dark matter or the Higgs boson particle, and they even called it the God particle because we understand so little about it. Or it's what makes up the universe, or dark matter. It's something we don't understand. But even in the things that we do understand a little bit, God is even there. You know what I mean? So I think that it diminishes God to say he's only what we don't understand. But even the things that we kind of have an idea of, God is even implicit in those things. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so again, what did you mention earlier? There was something you mentioned earlier about atheists. And the last thing you just said. Was it about understanding, and then being and just understanding atheists and where they're coming from?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that we have to have grace, because I remember, like, even the people surrounding me, the people I was with, if they would have sat me down and just been like, hey, let's think about it. Because you don't just have nihilism and then there's nothing, right? Because that's what a lot of people think. It's like, okay, let's forget God. Let's discount. Okay, let's throw that out. The world is only matter. It is only what we can sense. It is what I was talking about. It is only what we can feel. It was the five senses. So, but even like simple things that we understand, right? Like we got a pretty good idea of Wi-Fi, and that is completely unseen. You can't see that at all.
Okay.
Like it's right. We're using it right now.
Right.
Like and we have to think about how, like, it's kind of madness in a way, right? Like, we're sending our images and our thoughts and the sounds that we're making through a screen to one another over a frequency that we cannot even see, So I feel like God is implicit even in those things. So as in, like, that's remarkable, But back to what I was saying regarding nihilism, you don't just have nihilism and then emptiness, right? Meaning you don't just feel nothing after you've thrown out God. There's only pain. There's only a kind of suffering. That's why so many of the atheists, there are so many of the anti-spiritual types. I'm not even going to call them non-spiritual, but the anti-spiritual types are always, well, not always, but so frequently lash out. There's a deep, or even if it's not overt, there's an undertone of resentment and bitterness in the way they speak, and the kind of their view of the world and what.
I'm gonna go a step further, man. Believe it or not, I see a lot of Christians that have that same behavior.
Exactly. Because they don't understand. Yeah.
Exactly. It's because they're living in the tradition or the religion of church, but haven't taken the time to really, connect with God or get to know God or get to know his character about things. And so that, again, if you think God hates you or
which I was convinced for a little while.
Yeah.
I was like, look at what's going on in my life. Like, you don't like me. Like, maybe you don't exist, So, but that's so fun that you mentioned that. Regarding, I feel like in a way, you said you see those same characteristics in a lot of Christians. I feel like a lot of Christians, if they were to be, because they don't understand and they have this fear of their lack of understanding, that they go, oh, well, let me profess God. Let me be a church person. Let me be in the church. Let me read the Bible and continue and read over and over again. And even though their understanding, their spiritual depth is not increasing. But in reality, if they were to be completely and totally and utterly honest with themselves, not all Christians, but regular Christians, they have the same position as the atheist. The atheist just he's honest, his predisposition. He's like, I don't know, right? You have this one version of a Christian that's like, oh, it's this way, but he's pretending. he doesn't really understand, right? He lacks spiritual depth. He lacks philosophical depth. If he were to be completely honest with himself, then he's in the exact same position as the atheist. He don't get it, he don't understand, and he's upset about it. That's why you have both of them
angry,
having that undertone, that undercurrent of, sort of, they're upset.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. And you're in a, if you're a Christian, what happens is you're in church and you don't want anyone to know you're struggling with your faith or your belief. Yep. It's just like, when you're around a group of people, you want to fit in a way, or so you and that's the one thing, and it's so funny, like everything that we're talking about is strictly biblical. Like you can find examples where the Bible tells us there's no healing for unseen or hidden type things. Like you have to, like if it's a scar or if it's something, that whole don't ask God questions or don't ask God why, you can't find that anywhere in the Bible. Like in that way, you could never find that, but that became a religious, chant, a religious, structure that we stand by. I get that they were trying to say, oh, because he's sovereign, he's respectful, whatever, but it's also, he's our father. Like imagine, not being able to go to your father or your mother and ask them a question, about life. Right. Like that's ludicrous, It's something else you said that I wanted to, circle back on real quick. You were saying that it's a cop-out for us just to look for God in the things that we can't see, and
the God of the gaps.
And the God of the gaps. And then, but he's in those, he's in the things that we can see. Recently, there was a pastor that came to our church. Her name was Anita Phillips. And, I definitely recommend, to our listeners, to anyone to go and check out, some of her messages. But she's a psychologist with a master's degree, and she was comparing emotions and, and how they tie into our relationship with God. Because that's another thing. For so long, the church tells us, not to have emotions about things, you shouldn't be afraid. You shouldn't be this, and you shouldn't get mad, and you shouldn't do this. And these are all natural components of our body and how our body reacts to certain things in life. So one is silly. It's another silly thing that, as a church, we try to, explain away, but what she did, and it was just an epiphany. Again, a guy who appreciates science and appreciates, when God reveals himself in the different things. She was showing, a different nervous system and how it looks like the plants in the Garden of Eden, and the description of the Garden of Eden in the Bible. And it just blew my mind because, one, as a Christian, I knew that there had to be a connection of how we're made up and how these, different things relate and how God, made us. And it's something that we can talk about from, I think, a generic standpoint. But when you see the detail of it, when you see it and the science, when you see it, when I just watched a message and she was talking about, like, when we get fear or when we try to make decisions in our mind, the scripture about the thorns. You know what I mean? So we know the parable of the sower or whatever, and then she focused in on that scripture about the thorns. Well, she showed scientifically, like, how in our brain we're in a state of fear. And scientists call this, she didn't make this word up, thorns are formed on those nerves, which keep us from making the best decisions about different things. It keeps us in a state. That's a physical thing that happens, to us, that, again, the Bible's describing it in its own way, but now science is actually proving that. So, it took me back to what you said, that, and I'm excited about that, but just in the everyday life that we have, I think the more you look for God, the more you see him in those situations.
The implicit in the world that we can actually see, in the world that we have somewhat of an understanding of, at least. So you said thorns and fear. Okay. So I remember I was going with this. So at least at some level, it's like, I remember, just like you said, you feel these certain emotions, you feel a certain kind of way, you feel this, and people just parrot scriptures to you, right? And this is something that I've talked a lot about with my family. It's like, thou shalt not fear, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, yeah, okay, but I'm still scared. Like, I'm glad you reminded me of that verse. Or don't have wrath, or be careful to wrath. It's like, all right, I'm glad that you reminded me of that scripture, but I'm still feeling this. And maybe I may not act it out, but but like you said, there's literally a scientific reality behind our emotions in our brain. So meaning, yes, the way you feel, you need to figure out how to at least do some sort of interrupt that cycle of feeling, right? Whether it's fear, whether it's anger, whatever it is. That's why, in a way, God is implicit in the natural world. And I think he wants us to understand a great deal of the natural world because, you know, yes, I'm glad you told me that, to whoever would tell me this when I was growing up or whatnot. I'm glad you mentioned to me that I'm not supposed to be wrathful. I'm supposed to be slow to wrath as God is. Well, I'm not God, and I don't. I'm still feeling angry about what happened. Can you please tell me what to do? And then when you're telling them, hey, this is the way I'm feeling, they just, again, they get upset. They might requote the Bible, and it's like, you haven't given me an actual, like, first of all, the Bible's an ancient structure, ancient literature, right? You haven't given me actual instructions on how to potentially interrupt that cycle so I can actually make better decisions. And that's another one of those things where, you know, there's a disconnect between the younger generation and the older generation, and a kind of, deviating or going away from God, because it's like, yes, I understand. Like, for instance, God says, there's a verse in the Bible that says, be still and know that I am God. How do I be still? Right? Like, that's a beautiful sounding verse. And, the King James, that's brilliant literature, right? But how exactly do I be still? And I feel like, because the older generation, not everybody, but a great deal of them would just get upset, and they lack the spiritual understanding or the philosophical understanding of those texts. People were left in the wilderness, and in a way, like I said before, in the very, very beginning of this, these various cultural institutions are, and I don't want to get to us versus them, but in a way, it's like they're waiting for you to lack understanding. Like, ignorance is a vice. Because when you lack understanding and you can't give your kids instruction or your community what they need, there are various institutions that are waiting to consume them and fill them with absolute nihilistic nonsense that, if you don't combat, if you and just from somebody who almost got consumed into this, you know what I mean, in terms of, like you said, like being an atheist and reading all the atheist authors, and practically being like I made it my, I was always looking for God when I look back at it. Like, I was always looking for God, but I pretty much made it my mission, almost, like, to find Christians to argue with, because, really it was like, man, when I think back to it, it's like, what I want you to tell me is, I want you to have an answer for me. I really don't want to, defeat God in a way, not even that that's possible, but I want you to answer this so I can stop feeling like this. That's why I'm seeking you out, so I can argue with you about the nature of the universe, and where exactly is God, and what proves God, and you know what I mean?
Yeah. And so one of the things, man, again, this is exciting. You got to come back up here again. Is, when you were talking, right, you gave the scenario of, someone, giving you a scripture, saying this is how we're acting, or you're asking for an answer about something, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe you're angry about something that happened, or you have fear about something, or whatever. I think the missing piece when we're talking to other people is the truth and transparency of things. Saying, you know what, this happened to me, and I was afraid of it as well. I had fear about it. Like, I think our pride gets in the way because,
The talk show. Well,